Yeah, as I kick things off, and I still feel like I'm kind of blundering around, not really sure what I'm doing, often playing events instead of, with goals. Jihadist plays Al Jazeera as an event, and they were able to reduce Saudi Arabia's alliance status. And they also tried to do some movement but couldn't get more guys into Somalia. It's tough to move people around in the world, even entering, places you think would be fairly easy to get into. Well, Somalia is only fair, but even you only have a 50-50 chance of getting your terrorist cells into even poor regimes. Tora Bora was used for what? I don't remember. Oh, that was the movement card. Iran, I used the event there to do something. To hit Iraq and made a test there. And Iraq's now fair governance. As far as I can tell, it jumps to neutral. As long as you do a test, it always shows up as neutral. It's not just a first-time test. And I also played a card that tested the Philippines and put a little marker in play that may have some blocking effect on other cards. Okay, at the end of this, Islamicists have moved into Russia. They also played this Kurdistan card to test Turkey, and they returned to Iraq to poor governance. They're pumping that number up. The U.S. has decided they need to start limiting the power of Al-Qaeda throughout. So they dropped a cell, got one out of India using special forces, and then played this card, which dropped the funding down to moderate. That's important because it means that these can't just be recruited. It means that there's going to be less cards as well. So that's kind of that's what I used largely against my wife, and it was very successful, although I probably was cheating as well. I'm probably cheating in this too. Not in this particular case, but just tried to keep the funding as low as possible, and I was trying to wipe out all the cells for a victory. That's a tough cell, but I have a card in my hand, which I'm probably not going to be able to use, Gitmo, which could have actually prevented cells probably from showing up easily. But that's where we are, and we're back at the jihadist. Well, the Islamicists had a card they didn't really want to play, so they tried to set off plots in either Russia or China that would increase funding. Didn't happen. They also played the Lebanon War, force a U.S. discard, and dropped a cell into Yemen. For the U.S., they did a couple of disruption activities in Pakistan, which ended up negating the event over on this card. That's one of the things, again, sometimes you can do something to prevent a bad event from happening. So you gain some traction. If you're kind of blundering around and not sure what you're doing, and that's what I usually am, and this works towards my get rid of the cells, drop the funding type strategy that I'm trying to put into play at this point. So, it all works kind of together. Make sure that bad event doesn't affect me. Okay, this time the Islamicists managed to lay a plot down in Egypt. The U.S. responded. The Gitmo card isn't really of use at this late in the turn, and they got another card they want to hold. Stopping it seems as good as anything else because they don't want it would be too funding. It would push it back up to there. See what they do with the last cards. The U.S. is holding a card they don't really want to play. And we're done. The final Islamicist card was a Predator. They used that to try to trigger more plots, try to force this card the U.S. wants to hold out of play. It didn't work. And I'm going to separate these just so that they're less likely to end up stacked together. There's a lot, and that ended up making one of the Somali plots go away. There's a lot of weakness in terms of the Islamicist position now. With all these plots they've set off, they've got a lot of things that someone can do something about. The problem is disruption can't really be done in these Muslim countries unless they're either allies or there are troops present. I can do something about them in Russia or China, though. So that may be at least one factor in trying to reduce the troops count. Anyway, we run through the end of the turn thing, and importantly, the funding drops. Prestige drops. It had gotten up kind of high on the War of Ideas, but now it's going to bump back up. And no lapsing events, no reserves, and no regime change. Okay, so I deal out some more cards, and that's it. But you can see the number of poor and Islamist countries, with all these new countries being brought into play, is increasing to a dangerous level, at which point the Islamist wants to work on U.S. prestige as well as trying to convert countries to poor. They're going for that kind of political victory rather than really worrying about, well, what else do we have here? The Islamist rule side of things, or blowing a plot up. This one seems the most likely right now. But we'll see. It's a change. It's always a changing situation in this game. You know, you've got to kind of look at what you've got on the board and say, well, what's my best threat right now? How can I push my opponent to sort of abandon whatever his plans for winning are to prevent me or to block what I'm up to? Well, the jihadists tried to get rid of a card. Well, basically, they didn't get rid of the card that they didn't want to play through their plots because they had a lot of people face up, and then they did movement into Somalia. That looks like a weak spot. But the U.S., with its improved prestige, started doing powerful War of Ideas attacks, and they've switched Pakistan and the Gulf states. Just sort of this domino effect there. Now they've got this up to 9. If they can get... no, I'm sorry. They've got this up to 3? It's got to be higher than that. I think I added to this one. They've got only 3, 4, 5 fair good countries, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's all I count. And their resources should be at 6. They have to get this up to 12 to win. I've got to recheck my numbers, obviously. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 Islamist countries I get. 12. I was right there, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I don't know. I can't count. I'll figure it out when I don't have a camera in my hand. Anyway, these are major shifts for the U.S., and it helps them push the War of Ideas further and further because these good regimes become anchors for them. They also may want to start pulling troops out so that they have a higher status here. They can't do it out of Afghanistan, really, because of the besieged regime. But the Gulf states, well, and Pakistan, they can drop their troop strengths down to low intensity and thereby get more cards. And now the two sides are fighting over the same things again. The Islamist jihadist player reverted Pakistan using the door to jihad was closed, and then a leak was used to counter the wiretapping event. Well, essentially to take advantage of the wiretapping event and say, yo, that was bad. And that could have thrown the U.S. hard, which would have been a blow to prestige in the long run. But it did hurt prestige. One thing I was doing wrong, I forgot, didn't realize, you roll dice on a failure for prestige. Watching Hello Gregor's video made me realize, whoa, I haven't been doing that. In this case, it only went down 1, and that's not that unlikely. Usually it only moves by 1 or 2 points because you roll 2 dice and take the lower of the 2 dice. But there's a chance that it could be exceedingly high. I've just not done it that way. Anyway, then the U.S. played, And they kind of reversed that. They did the War of Ideas back in Pakistan, no big shock there. And they also did a disruption activity in Afghanistan in order to increase their prestige back to, actually, they should have done it in the other order, but they didn't, in order to increase their prestige for further wars. War of Ideas. Okay, the Islamists used a clean operatives card to shift 2 people out of Afghanistan that were under suspicion into the U.S. Then they set off a plot there, or tried to. They failed. That's a tough thing, but that would have been a big funding boost, jump it all the way to 9 if either one had succeeded. For the U.S., well, they tried to extend their War of Ideas into Iraq. That didn't work. They would have been just trying to move it to ally and then begin improving governance. An expensive process with a poor governance country. But with that much wealth, they're not too far. Iraq and Saudi Arabia would win them the game, essentially, if they could add them without any problems happening. Then they could have done it again with this Hambali card, but that's a good event. It's going to be removed from the game. They got to remove a cell from Indonesia, which is not a big deal, but they also got 2 free extra cards. Of course, those cards could be events that they don't want to play. One is Amerithrax. That can be played around with and avoided. Okay, well, for the jihadist player, they managed their last 2 cards. Now, the U.S. still has a whole big hand they have to play to react. But on the last 2 cards that the Islamist has, they dropped 2 plots in the U.S., 1 over in Afghanistan, 1 in Somalia, a couple of big 3-point cards. Those could be painful plots which could destabilize these governments as well as improve the funding. The U.S. would like to wipe some out, but they can only get 2 with their cards unless they have something special. So this is a pretty potent wave of attacks taking place here. Well, the U.S. had 2 3-point cards. They had a hard time choosing to play this one because of the effect on it. The effect was a cell in Pakistan, and now there's this FATA card. You can't disrupt in Pakistan unless there's a regime change there, and this has some effects on some other cards as well. This is a painful card they've been holding for a couple of turns, not really wanting to play it, but the choice is risking Somalia, which is a regime change threatened country. Of course, the other one they played in Afghanistan, they got rid of that plot, but there's a problem. As the plots go off, 2 are going off in the U.S. Now, we knew there were no weapons of mass destruction plots here. But this puts this puts the funding back up to 9. So the jihadists are now, energized once again. These plots are going to go back. We have a 1 and a 2, but I don't think that's important. And now we have to roll the posture. Now, posture gets rolled twice. I'm only going to roll it once because only the second one is effective. And the U.S. stays soft on that second one. And now we have to check prestige as well. And on the first roll, it's going to rise by a point. And on the second one, it will drop by 3 points. So that's kind of a painful situation for them. Alright, well, now the U.S. alone gets to play, and they've got 3 cards. They don't have a 3-point card to hold. They may want to hold this or not. It doesn't really help them terribly. We'll see what they do. This little FATA chip is kind of annoying in the same way the Al-Anbar is. It doesn't give everything. It says no disrupt unless RC, but the card itself specifies no disrupt operations there, referring to Pakistan. Very, very different issue in play. And since this chip doesn't get played right in Pakistan, as it were, it's not absolutely clear. Now I'm going to put it in Pakistan to help remind me that that's what it applies to. but it's just sort of a little mechanical issue. The game tries to give you all these little reminders and everything, but it's tough across the board. But for the player, these reminders become almost absolute to rely on. You've got to look at this. You've got to look at the board situation. And trying to remember some card that you've got a marker for is going to, if it's different from the marker or not complete enough, is kind of a pain in the butt. And the U.S. finishes off its turn playing the Amerithrax card to no effect with the event because they're not holding any of their own. Like I said, that's easy to manipulate, and they use that in Somalia to destroy a cell, but there's still known cells operating in the United States that cause that terrorist action. It's hard for me to knock them out comparatively because I'm soft, and that means disruption is only going to affect one cell. Plus, I kind of want to boost my prestige. The Somalia versus U.S. choice, that's pretty much a fair division either way, but it sucks to have cells in the U.S., and I kind of want to get those out of there. But instead of playing hard to do that, I've been playing on Afghanistan, and I played this one. That puts a cell in Central Asia and Afghanistan, and now I can defeat the Afghan cell, and I think I already did that. Yeah, there were 2 in there before I played the card. Well, after I played the card and placed these 2, and 1 flipped up and 1 goes back, and that gave me a point of prestige. So I'm boosting the U.S. prestige, but now here comes the problem. Let's see, funding goes down a little. Okay, no biggie there. It's still way up. My prestige is going to go down based on an Islamist rule, but then it goes up because of my status with the rest of the world. I'm in alignment with the world in a very heavy way. I've got a lot of support for what I'm doing. No lapsing events, but this comes off. This was not triggered, so it's not removed. Reserves to 0, they are. New hands, and then a regime change to tan, which doesn't happen. So that's the end of this turn. Things were looking pretty good for the U.S., but some of those events and then the plots really swung the issue back to where the jihadis have a powerful position again in terms of being able to affect the world. They now have all their cells available. They're going to get a big handful of cards. Plus, the big U.S. card reserve that had built up, part of it during the turn, is gone. You know, they've been carrying over a card every turn. Well, they didn't manage it this turn. I'll deal out new cards. One thing I'm thinking about the deck situation. So, and I'll try to catch this in the review when I get to it, but if I was playing a one-deck game, I would have already had to have shifted gears and said, okay, I'm pretty much giving up auto wins and just going to try to go for the end of game win, which is what, twice as many resources under good governance as an Islamist rule. Hey, I'm working on that, so I can keep that there. But for the Islamists, what's their long term? They have to have half as many under. So they'd be worried more about the Islamist versus good than the U.S. is, really. And at this point, I think both people would be playing for the end of deck victory. But because I'm playing multiple decks, I've got a lot more time to try to play out for that more ultimate victory. Anyway, I'm going to load this one up.